the denominational lines of faith traditions may need to be redrawn?
Lines are always being redrawn, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here is your host and moderator.
Hello, viewers. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrea Laxton. I am the moderator. I'm also the president of Andrews University in Michigan, and I have with me a group of individuals who are going to join with me in a conversation today.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I'm the senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
And I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister at First Christian Church, Fort Worth, Texas.
And we have an interesting conversation for you today, and I'm going to start with an opening statement. In an extensive opinion article in the New York Times in February 2022, David Brooks identifies a growing challenge in evangelicalism. After quoting from several prominent evangelical church leaders and members, he posits that while there is currently growing division among many parts of American society, for evangelicals, the problem is deeper. He writes, quote, "Christians are supposed to believe in the spiritual unity of the church. While differing over politics and other secondary matters, they are in theory supposed to be unified by their shared first love as brothers and sisters in Christ. Their common devotion is supposed to bring out the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. However, Brooke argues that for many Christians, the foundation of their unity has been fragmented in recent years, leaving bitterness and disappointment. Some of the challenges that have increased in their intensity are identified by dissenters as partisan politics, power focusing on the leader rather than God, corruption, and ideological battlegrounds. In that context, individuals speaking on important topics such as race or other social challenges can be labeled and dismissed as woke, leaving unaddressed issues that should be important to a Christian. Out of this disappointment, pain, and loss, it appears that increasing numbers of evangelicals and others are looking for change and transformation. In particular, some are looking for new coalitions around shared biblical values rather than institutional religions or churches. So the panelists are asked to consider the following questions. To what extent do you agree with Brooks' description of the crisis in evangelicalism? Do the same challenges exist in other faith communities? If you agree with the challenge, do you consider that new coalitions around shared values rather than formal faith traditions and structures is the answer to keeping faith alive? And finally, what are the core tenets in your faith tradition that you consider critical to holding your communities of faith together? Right, those are our questions, and I'm going back to those that began our conversation. Rabbi.
So I think throughout history, people try to find a faith community that they believe is authentic and expressive of the way that they feel called to practice their faith. I'm reminded of the great story of the fellow who's marooned on a desert island for 20 years, and they discover him finally, and he's giving all the people who rescue him a tour of the island, shows all the buildings that he built, and the one he's most proud of is the synagogue that he built. And it's this beautiful, ornate place. And they say, well, what's that building over there? He says, oh, that's the synagogue I would never set foot in. Everybody sort of finds their ways of finding communities that either fit or don't fit. And I think that that's how you see the development and the growth of different denominations. In America, there was once just a group of Jews, and then there were people who said, no, we need to tend towards a more traditional practice of Jewish law. And there was that said, I need a more progressive practice of Jewish law. And you have the birth of different denominations. You had Reform Judaism, you had Conservative Judaism. And then for those that wasn't enough, there was Reconstructionist Judaism. Before that, there was Hasidic Judaism, in which there's always this sort of tension between holding on to the facets and the tenets of tradition while at the same time allowing for the imposition of innovation. And I think that with the fluidity that you see, especially in America, where you don't have a state-imposed one right way, you see the flourishing of the diversity of different kinds of religious expression. In Jewish tradition, you see what they call the independent minyanim movement, where you have groups of people who say, I'm going to get together with this group of people and I'm going to form a synagogue community because those people and I have a similar way in which we want to practice our faith, similar ways in which we want to raise our kids, similar ways in which we want to, quote unquote, make Shabbat together. So I think that figuring out where you fit may not always be in the conventional denominational lines that were drawn generations before.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you setting the tone of our conversation. I come from a community of faith that began out of a notion that we needed to redraw everything. That we needed to get away from denominations. That the church had lost the power of its witness because it no longer understood the power of Jesus' prayer on that last night with his disciples, that all of his disciples might be one, and instead had been splintered. We created a movement. Didn't want to call ourselves a church or denomination, but a movement on the frontier of America to unite the church. But with a clear understanding that we needed to do so by touching also the power of the origins of the church, by reclaiming the power of the original church. And so we disciples have been through this. We are into redrawing. Our experience even includes one of our founders who said that he never intended that the body that he was a part of forming should long exist, but should soon cease to exist and melt into the larger body of Christ. What I want to emphasize about that statement, though, is that he hoped that they would cease to exist as a separately identifiable group, but melt into the larger body of Christ and not into nothing. And that's what I see happening far too often as folks as churches have lost their sheen, as churches have become identified with political party over anything else in some cases, as churches have become identified with individuals more than anything else, is that folk have gone away into that none category, into that great spiritual but not religious category, and that's a problem. I think that we should always be about finding new forms in which we can be united. But unity comes by listening to each other and learning from each other. But its engine, my experience is that its engine is in mission. As I think we said a few weeks ago in one of our shows, that we really learn to be together by sweating together, by serving together, by reaching out to the least and the lost together, and standing side by side with each other. I think when if our new forms are going to have any, if they're going to last, they're going to be built around that kind of common experience.
This is a very good conversation. I appreciate this format today too. I had the privilege of joining the other bishops from Texas, the other Catholic bishops from Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas, on a visit to Rome, and we had a meeting with Pope Francis that went 2.5 hours, and we sat in a circle of chairs and we had a discussion, and he said, feel free to complain, feel free to gripe, just tell me what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what do you need to know, what do I need to know? So in the discussion I asked him, I said, this was prior to the last election, and I said, the U.S. presidential election, I said, we're going to be going into a presidential election, and I said, how do we teach as shepherds and help to form the consciences of our people when so many of our people seem to primarily identify religiously with their political party or slants of their political party, and then they approach the gospel, and at least as it's been taught by the Church, Catholic Church, as something secondary or as a smorgasbord, and the Pope he said that's a very tough question, and he said start by praying, and he said teach what Jesus taught, and then teach how the Church teaches what Jesus taught, and reinforce that, and remind your people to return to prayer. And he said, and repeat that. And he said, many times they're going to come to you and say, tell me who to vote for. And he said, don't do it. It's the devil. All right. He said, return always to Christ in the gospel, and as the Church teaches Christ in the gospel. And I thought that was very good advice. And he added too, he said, and if you do that, everyone will be furious with you. And he said, then you know you are right. So
I think what you touch on, Michael, is so good. I think that what happens in Judaism is that there is this idea called the covenant, right? That we as Jews are bound in covenant with God, and it is our obligation to perform the commandments that God has asked us to perform in living our life in covenant with God. But how we live our life in covenant with God, how we interpret those commandments for the lives that we lead today is open to a pretty wide breadth of interpretation. And I love the fact that the Pope told you to go back to the source, go back to the covenant. For you, it's a new covenant. For us, it's an older covenant, but still a covenant, right? And if you focus on the covenant, then the pathway that you need to follow will show itself for sure.
And I think you also mentioned the fact that he said to go back to that as interpreted by the Church. I don't know if that was your exact word. Yeah. And that comes to me back to this topic because to me, I think our traditions, our theology is important. I really think it is. Those are the eyes through which we see and interpret so much. And I think to throw those out and just say, okay, let's find some values that we share together. I don't think that's going to hold. I really don't think that's going to hold, because I think there's a depth in that understanding of a tradition that really helps give us depth to our belief. Now, that may show itself, as it is in the Jewish tradition, in many different forms, but it's still a Jewish tradition. You're not saying, okay, let's join forces with with people from completely different traditions in that core. I think we have to keep that and deal with the fact that we have different approaches to things.
Well, and you still have touchstones. You still have the holy times. You still have Passover. You still have Yom Kippur. And in our tradition, you still have that touchstone of the table, as I've mentioned before here. That's so central to who we are. Now, we can agree to do a whole lot of different things and believe a whole lot of different things and be about a whole lot of different things in our lives. But at some point, if we continue to come back to some of those touchstones, which usually reside in our origins, then we're going to be on more solid ground, and it's going to be something that's going to last.
So what do we say that those that feel disenfranchised in our communities by the organization? Because that's really what this comes down to.
I think that Tom is right. I think that, we have our touchstones. We have who we are. And I think for me, I would say, as a Jew who comes from the Reformed tradition, I'm constantly trying to hone what that means. I'm constantly returning to my basic core beliefs, to those touchstones, and trying to ensure that the way in which I'm living those touchstones and sharing it with my congregation is as powerful and inspirational as it possibly can be. I once remember I took a tour of a local evangelical church, and they had just built a new worship center, and it was like a modern theater. It had the most unbelievable technology. It was a beautiful worship space. And I remember talking to the pastor. I said, wow, this is really impressive. And he said to me, if you're going to worship the creator of the universe, you cannot worship with mediocrity. And I don't think it's just mediocrity in equipment. I think it's mediocrity in ritual. So what I constantly try to do is to hone what it is that I do as proudly as I can. And then if the Jews are moved by that, they will come. So I have members of my congregation who will say, I grew up Orthodox, but that doesn't fit for who I am right now. And then I spent time in a conservative synagogue. But you know what? I'm really moved by you and by the faith community that we feel here. And I love to be a member of this congregation because it speaks to me. I've also had people who were members of my synagogue who after a time said, Dan, I love you, but I'm going over to the conservative congregation because that fits better for me. And I think that, as long as we stand up proud and say this is who we are in the marketplace of ideas, people will select the ones that speak to them the most strongly, where they hear God speaking through it the most competitively.
The danger, though, since I brought up those touchstones, the danger in always revisiting our origins is that we get caught there. Is that the performance of those things becomes the substitute for touching the holy, and we never want to let that happen.
I think the fragmentation that's gone on, there's one aspect of it at least, is that church, synagogue, worship of God as a corporate body really kind of has its primary experience, I think, in family. All right, the Second Vatican Council taught about how the family is the domestic church. In other words, it's our first understanding, experience of God, our formation in the faith. And I think people have a fragmented understanding of family that previously was not common. All right, and so the old saying about you can pick your friends but not your family has been, I think, changed to, well, pick your family first, and usually it's from your friends. and so there's been a real shift in that. And so there's the challenge I have as a bishop. One of them is that the prior Catholic experience in this country, in the United States, was that you go to Mass and you belong to the parish in which you live. All right, so territorially, unless there was a rare occasion not, and you had an obligation and responsibility to be a member of and support the parish in which you live. Now, the wisdom of that, I think, is that you had a responsibility to the community to which you were given, instead of the community you were choosing for yourself. And so that helped us, I think, as Catholics, in some ways, to have to respond to the real needs of people who were of a different economic order, class of you, and had different means. You had to deal up front with the immigrants who were coming in, and the parish changing the face, but they were still Catholics and they still had a right to belong. And what concerns me is that more and more I have fragmented worship, where people are selecting according to economic means, and they're also according to race and language. And it's a problem and a challenge.
Yeah, we Protestants taught you guys that.
We're going to pick up again in a moment. For now, we're going to have a break.
We hope you're enjoying today's program. If you'd like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the vision and history of the program, and we invite you to become a ministry partner, explore our Town Hall Estates healthcare facilities, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, we look forward to receiving your letters. You may write us at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. If you have a prayer request, please send it to prayerrequest@americanreligious.org. Thank you for writing and thank you for watching. Now, back to today's closing statements.
Welcome back. I don't know what your faith tradition is, or whether you have stayed with the same tradition or been moving or looking for something else. But I hope today's conversation will help frame that, what is important when you make those types of decisions. So let's move to some summary thoughts.
Well, I think the fragmentation that we experience as either denominations or religious traditions, or as a church, however we're defined and define ourselves, has to look at how are we fragmented as human beings. In one sense, there's a sense that we are fragmented because the family has shifted and changed and falls more in line with how an individual person defines who their family is. And it begins and ends there, if you will, instead of sort of a family you're born into, even if one is absent physically from one's parents or siblings or half-siblings, there's still a sense of real belonging that is either enjoyed or grieved, given the particular circumstances. I think also it would be helpful. I think fragmentation can be of value if we look at light as far as what is drawing us together and where are we challenged and where are we lacking, and how do we define ourselves? How do we worship together? How do we come together? And it's only God who's going to bring us together in unity. That's not something we can do of ourselves without further fragmenting ourselves and our greater community.
I have been drawn more and more to a particular story in the New Testament lately, and perhaps it fits here as well. As we are redrawing ourselves, taking on new configurations, I want to remind us of the story of Jesus in the wilderness and the three temptations that he faced. The first, turn this stone into bread. Meet all needs. Okay? The second, let's go up here on the pinnacle of the temple, jump off. Wouldn't that be a great show? The third temptation, here are all the kingdoms of the world. Temptation to power. I think those three temptations are three things that we need to keep in mind as we're evaluating what our religious community might look like right now. However we redraw ourselves, let's guard against the temptation to try to meet all needs, and the temptation to celebrity, and the temptation to power.
In Jewish tradition, there's an idea called Klal Yisrael, which means the entirety of the Jewish people. And no matter where you are in that denominational spectrum, there's an idea that you owe some sense of fidelity and duty to the larger corpus of what is the Jewish project and what is the Jewish people. There is always a tension between innovation and tradition. I think that's actually in that vibration between those poles where the music of Jewish life is to be found, and perhaps the music of religious life is also to be found. So if we can try to advance what we believe as most effectively as we can, at the same time having enough humility to realize there might need to be space for others to plow their own path, we may find that we have a more effective way of connecting with God and with each other.
You know, thank you all. Thank you for this great conversation. You know, as I've been listening, it seems to me that one of the things, other than the fact that there is importance in our traditions, which we shouldn't just throw out too quickly because we don't like other things. I think that's part of what we've heard. But the other is that it seems to me that we have a responsibility in a community, in a denomination, in a group, to be givers, not just having everything the way that we want it to be. And we shouldn't give up on that too quickly to say, let's go find somewhere else. This group may be better than this group, because we always can be chasing something that may look better than what we've had. Because eventually we have a responsibility as believers and as people of faith. It's not just what we get, it's also what we give and how we help frame the future. Well, the Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory but in reality. And so now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.